I wonder if you could reflect for us some of your memories of this agility that is Eric Molobi. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much. I have known Eric for quite a few years. Very interesting because I was Eric's boss for most of the time, but he was my mentor. So it was a very interesting kind of dynamics. And I think today invoked memories about Eric. He was a friend, he was a leader, he was a visionary, he had a very strong constitution. There was something that Eric did personally to me, which is so important even for the time that we are in. While he was serving in the KTI, he really threw me in the deep ends of things. I mean, I was young. Of course, I was sitting on the board. I mean, Eric was, he had a great sense of humor. He would tell stories. And then, boom, he's invited to go to Algeria with the president as part of a binational commission. And he's going to meet President Bouteflika. And you know what he did? He then said, "Zo, get ready. You are going to Algeria." And I was young. I arrived in Algeria. I was in the midst of business people. I was completely lost for depth. But I thought out what he was doing then. I mean, I was young. But he was actually preparing me and mentoring me as a young leader.
Cheryl, it's overwhelming for me to witness the life of Bra Eric through this biography. But I wonder if you could bear witness to this man who led from the back in the UDF and the United Democratic Movement. Could you just help us to get an insight as to who he was in that part of his life?
Thank you very much, Prof. And let me also just say how good it is that you reminded us what GIBS is about and how far our country has journeyed. Because we're sitting in a time when there are huge challenges in our country and in fact in the world. And I think thank you. And says Martha, just thanks and Lelo and everybody for delaying maybe a bit. Because by heavens, we need it now. We think of the times when Eric went to jail and through the formation of the UDF and the high season of Ronald Reagan, of Maggie Thatcher, and the terrible cruelty that crowd visited upon the most vulnerable people in their own countries and the tone they set for the world. And here we find ourselves back, waking up every morning, and we're not sure what is going to hit us again, sometimes in our own country and sometimes in the world. And it's good for us, and us, Martha, to perhaps have that now when we need to really reach deep into ourselves to stand up and live in the way that Eric would have. If we think of since the time of the 70s, the 80s, when the UDF was formed, and through that whole period, and we forget what little time we had. It was 3 years that the UDF was allowed to live. And when many people were killed, to in fact silence what the UDF stood for and what we did. It's from 1983, and then in 1986, the first state of emergency was declared. But we look at the courage, and we look at the wisdom and the vision, and we look at those of us, and it's just so wonderful to see who we are here. And I look at another football player here, Lek, Terra Lakota, who got his name from that. And who Eric would have called, I think I'm going to go where Iron and others did not want to go before me. And he would just call us these bloody monkeys, It was a favorite word of his.
It was.
And he used it, in fact, Comrade Judge Azar was saying earlier with Sidney Mufamadi when we were socializing inside there. Yeah, today they would have taken him to the Human Rights Commission just like that, you know, for whatever. But if we look at, and I think, Iron, your reference to the ability to pivot and the kind of vision we saw there, I just remember, and together with the courage that it took to sometimes pivot, and Bra Eric's ability to read moments and to act decisively in those moments. And I think there were a few ones. I remember many of those from the UDF days would remember with me, when we had to grapple with how do you stand firm on principle and look at how you pursue those principles through your strategy and your tactics that you adopt. And remember one, and how you brave to sometimes push things which many people might not agree with you. I remember that one night in Port Elizabeth in the Feather Market Hall, when we had to discuss, I see Trevor Battle just giggling there again, when we had to actually decide how do we deal with this question, amongst others in that conference, of deciding whether what do we say to white South Africans? Because then people were already starting to challenge the legitimacy of their sons being sent to the border, when the border had now moved into the townships, and it was no longer out there in Angola anyway. What do we say when the call was made to white South Africans to go and participate in that referendum? And here I would say, Comrade Dean, you know that Eric listened intently, actually. And somewhere, I think it must have been about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, as was our want in those days. We are going full steam at that time. And Comrade Eric eventually stood up in that conference and in fact proposed, together with Comrade Azar Firoz Kachalia, why we should tactically call on white South Africans to in fact go and vote no, to participate. And boycott politics was very much part of, as a weapon, you know, in those days. And you can imagine the fireworks that followed, but he stood firm. It was some of what Dean, you've just said, you know, like you just stand your corner and you take people calmly and firmly through that conversation. And then, of course, the question of the formation of Kagiso, and I think it's, again, when we think of what Donald Trump is up to at the moment, and the challenge which many NGOs actually face, and that ability to navigate firstly the formation of the trust of Kagiso, and to put the tramlines around it so that there was never any impropriety. It was led with vision, it was led with courage, and it was led with integrity, and it was built in a way that made it robust and resilient. And then when, in 1990, when it was clear with the democratic government that we were now going to be channeling that money, development aid was now going to go through, as it should, through a democratically elected government, what do you do with that vehicle of development that Kagiso Trust was? And the vision that him, together with the comrades here, actually took to pivot that into the Kagiso industries, you know, the formation with these youngsters, these monkeys that he found around the place, these clever people like Fani and others, you know, who actually went and formed. And I think I would also just say, Eric, the mischievous one, you know, and the clever. I remember the first time we had passports and we now went to New York to go and hold a corner again. But Eric had one obsession. He heard about this shop where you could get for a bargain price Floorsheims, ne? And it couldn't be anything else. It had to be Floorsheims. But I want to just conclude by saying the family man again. Says, Martha, you were just the love of his life. Hey, but what he called his girls, man. they were his downfall. That telephone bill that he had when he was the chair of Telkom. We said to him, just don't pay it, man, just don't pay it. He says, no, I can't. I'm the chairman of this company. And we're fighting for people who are not paying. And they would come after school. They would sit on his phone and make these long calls. But he kept that line open and he paid it. You were just his complete weakness. Thank you.
I'd like to understand what enticed this accountant who had never run a business to think he could be an entrepreneur and be this monkey that is going to change the world. Please, JJ, help us to understand what motivated you and what did you have to do to persuade this other young man sitting at the top there to join you in transforming this vision of business into reality.
No, thank you. Thank you, Morris. Actually, the journey to start KTI was an interesting one because, as you say, my parents didn't even have a spaza shop. So I couldn't say that I came from a business family. I was just an accountant, and he thought that I could count at least. So we started with Fanny, and as Jinzo has said, we were young. In fact, I think a few months thereafter, we decided that we need Eric to become part of the executive team because we would go to these meetings as these two young people that, many senior business people couldn't take seriously. But I think the interesting thing is that Eric trusted us. Young as we were, he trusted us. I think 3 or 4 months after we had started, one day we decided we were going to go to Eric and tell him that we want to resign because we had not brought any deal to the business. And he looked at us and he said, are you guys serious? We said, yes, Eric, we're getting salaries every month, but we've brought nothing. And he said, yeah, but you always say no when I send people to come and talk to you. We said, yeah, we don't want to waste your money. But he said, you're not going anywhere. You're going to run this business. And I think the rest is history. Because I think if it was somebody else, we didn't, one, we had no track record of running a business. And the second thing, in about 6 months, we had not demonstrated any track record of investments. So we were really candidates to be fired. But he trusted us. And the other thing that he taught us was that this business must be built on integrity. And whenever there were, in some of our investments, executives who wanted to take shortcuts, he would say, what would Archbishop Tutu say if he reads about Kagiso Trust in the newspapers in a negative way? And that was his, philosophy that we must never embarrass the trustees of Kagiso Trust, because of our association with the trust. And you can imagine these were clergy, they didn't even trust business, let alone, if we were to be involved in a scandal. And I think the third issue was black excellence. That was one of the things that that was drilled in our minds, that we must not be just a run-of-the-mill investment company. You guys must be excellent in what you do. And I think, the track record of the activities of, KTI, they still, some of those businesses are still around to this day, and which is really, testament to Eric's vision. And I think, as far as I can remember, there has never been anything reported about Kagiso, about theft, corruption, greasing people, to do business. Always above board. And I think that was one of the keys. But also, I mean, some of the people who worked at Kagiso have gone on to become, I mean, champions in their own right. I mean, you have Roger here, who was chairman of Westland for many years. I mean, Zanele Matlala, I mean, and many others who, I mean, from that dream of building a black investment company, there was an opportunity, I mean, for other black executives to rise. I mean, we had a fight, I mean, to appoint Roger Jardine as CEO of Kagiso Media with some other company that I won't mention, because they said he had no track record. And Eric said, I mean, when will black people ever have a track record? If we keep saying we can't appoint them because they have no track record. And I mean, he ran a great, I mean, business called Kagiso Media, and year after year producing good results. But that was one of the key considerations for him, that we must promote black people to also have the experience to run, I mean, commercial ventures.
How points out that on the one hand, Bra Eric was not a forgiving man. So if you lied once, he did not forgive you. And this is a story told through the voice of Dr. Andile Stang. However, at the same time, he didn't judge a group of people. He judged you on your own individual merits. He reminds us that, for example, when Bra Eric met the son of the man that sent him to Robben Island, Tak Himstra, and he reminds us that whilst he got a bit of a shock, he ended up being very good friends with Tak, and because he judged him on his own individual capacity. I wonder if you could give us an insight in terms of how you navigate this responsible leadership journey, but also doing so by seeing each person as a human being, not as part of a class that has to be defined. That's my starting point in introducing you into this conversation, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I knew Eric when we were still very young, actually. He was at the Vocational Training Center in Dube, and we were at Orlando High. And they had an excellent squad of Soccerites, footballers. He was at vocational at the same time as people like Chipa Moloi, a great footballer for Orlando Pirates, Tokyo Lesolang, trustee, Mos Mabena, a great squad. And because their enrollment was a limited one, so they didn't have all the divisions. And in playing against high schools in Soweto, where it would just be the A division playing against the Vocational Training Center A division. And all of us knew that you couldn't start a fight with the vocational team because they are, you know, tools of trade. Were dangerous weapons. So they could produce mallets and chisels and all kinds of dangerous weapons here. So, but Eric was a consummate gentleman. I mean, even as a footballer, he actually played at that time over weekends for a team called Mofolo Dynamos with one of his teachers, Teacher Shabangu, were in the same team. And, you know, football is a philosophy of life because it's about teamwork. And when Eric went to prison, it was a great loss. I mean, at the same time, it was a great message to all and sundry that even such an upright, law-abiding citizen could actually be, involved in the struggle against the obnoxious system of apartheid. And when he came out of prison, Lele said he was job hunting for a long time, but he ended up working for Munich Insurance Company. And very few people know that where the ANC head office is now, called Luthuli House, was actually the headquarters of Munich Re Company. And by sheer dint of example, as a conscientious worker, Eric persuaded his employers to employ activists, former prisoners, people like Patrick Lepunya, and others ended up working for Munich Re, just because of who Eric was and the impression he left on those German employers. And that is why when the Rivonia trialists were coming out of prison, even before the unbanning of the ANC, it is Munich Re which dedicated 2 floors of their building to the Rivonia trialists. They said, well, they could have offices there, downtown, and it was all because of Eric's, example and influence. Today, that building is ANC headquarters and is renamed Luthuli House. And very few people know that it was actually through Eric's example that, the owners of Munich Re felt that they could take the risk to provide office space to the Rivonia trialists when they came out of prison. And of course, one of the lessons that was passed on to us by our leaders was that we must never be like our oppressors, and that we are actually better human beings than our oppressors. And that is why, someone like John Kadimeng used to say to me that, if you are a leader of the organization or you are a public office bearer in government, you need 2 hearts, he says. He says you must always have 2 hearts, because when the first heart seems to be running out of patience and you're about to get angry with people, the bigger heart kicks in and says, no, please, don't do that. So when Gaungalelwe, his name is Gaungalelwe, it means that you need the big heart to kick in before you get angry with him. Yeah.